Hello, and welcome to my podcast/informal essay about Nyasha, one of my favorite characters from Tsitsi Dangarembga's novel, Nervous Conditions. Essentially, Nervous Conditions by Tsitsi Dangarembga is about a young South African girl named Tambu who lives in Rhodesia, an English colony located in South Africa that was originally called Zimbabwe. Tambu dreams of going to one of the white missionary schools in Rhodesia, yet it is her brother Namo who's been given this opportunity. On this note, the book begins with a pretty decent cold open, Tambu saying her brother is dead. The first chapter then goes on to lay out Tambu's family's relationship with that of her uncle, describing how Baba Makuru's wealth and status make him the patriarch of the entire extended family as well, effectively making him the pillar on which the wealth of all other family members depends. Not only this, but it's discussed that Baba Makuru believes every household within said extended family should have at least one member that is educated so as to lift each household out of poverty. So this is the basic setup for the book as a whole, introducing various themes like classism, the effects of colonization, and an education delivered by said colonizers, feminism, loneliness, and all-around injustice. A lot of these themes are perpetuated through the main character's experiences. Tambu is a wonderful representation of what South African people, and especially women, faced in the midst of British colonization. She begins to realize through her education at the mission among the white people, as well as her fellow South Africans, that there are issues with both cultures that she is now a part of, and the book is following her attempts to kind of negotiate that reality. However, while Tambu is a very interesting character and has a lot of important things to say, I found Nyasha far more interesting. From the very beginning, I related to her. I mean, a hot-headed young woman who excels in school at the expense of everything else, who dislikes Christianity, who hates the patriarchy, who consistently pushes herself too far and expects too much of herself, and who doesn't get along with her parents. Girl, same. In fact, Nyasha is meant to be the actual representation of Tsitsi Dangarembga, not Tambu. So it's safe to say that Nyasha is a key character in this book, and that she contributes possibly more than anyone else to the themes found therein. Part 1. Nyasha is introduced. At first, Nyasha is seen as lesser by Tambu for not knowing the cultural traditions of her South African family. Not only this, but we see that she has this really disturbing ability to switch herself off. Apparently, quote, one minute she was taking in everything that was happening, the next she would not have heard you, even if you had spoken to her. In fact, Tambu says in chapter 4 that Nyasha makes her feel, quote, uncomfortable because something had extinguished the sparkle in her eyes. These details set up the idea that Nyasha has a darker side to her, and that she has the propensity to self-isolate. However, as the story develops, we see that Nyasha is actually a very bubbly, fun-loving girl. We see her breaking rules here and there, but Tambu and her get along really well. However, there is an overarching tension between the girls throughout the book, as Tambu respects and obeys Baba Makuru far more than her cousin. On this note, when I was discussing Nyasha's development with my peers, the overwhelming majority agreed that Tambu, and that they didn't like her, and thought she was just a bratty teenager that needed to learn to respect and obey her parents, especially her father. As the story went on, however, people started to like her more. This is natural as she started getting more page time, and so we understood her better. As Tambu says in chapter 5, quote, I was no longer wary now that I knew who she was. I thought she was wise, too, although I was not sure why. This delves into the reason I liked her from the beginning, that a lot of people overlooked, and that's that she's just a kid. When you're a teenager, you're looking for your autonomy, and you're trying to figure out who you are. So you can't help that you're questioning things, and neither can Nyasha. She can't help that she does this, and she can't help that she does this more than other kids. And while her parents likely have some wisdom to lend, it's a lonely journey she's on, because only you really understand yourself. Additionally, it's even harder to figure out who you are and what you value with the societal pressures of colonization, sexism, racism, and her abusive parents. And make no mistake, they are abusive. So if she's not receiving respect from these people, the ones who are supposed to love her unconditionally no matter what she does, I mean, no wonder she's not respectful of them. If she's not allowed any space or freedom at this pivotal stage in her life, no wonder she's angry. But there are a lot of other reasons I like Nyasha, and why she is, to me, the most important and most richly developed character in this novel. Thus, this essay will be both in defense of Nyasha, and a way for me to unpack the meaning of her character for me personally. Essentially, I want to better understand and appreciate her struggles and help others to do the same in the hope of potentially understanding the effects of oppression and colonization on its victims, and just to better understand the human experience. Trigger warning, a lot of this video has to deal with eating disorders, bulimia and anorexia specifically, so please be advised and click away or find something else to watch if those are sensitive subjects for you. So, Nyasha. First, I'd like to go back to the theme of colonization, as Nyasha faced a lot of discrimination when she lived in England, and so now that she's back in Rhodesia, has this drive to think and learn more about the prejudices she faced. It's stated that, quote, she had nightmares about these things, the atrocities, but she carried on reading all the same because she said you had to know the facts if you were ever going to find the solution. She was certain the solutions were there. This is fascinating in that it displays Nyasha's inquisitive nature, as well as her solutions-oriented mindset. Even though she's seen a lot of hatred in the world, she isn't hopeless. She wants things to get better. She wants to better others in the system she lives under, and she actively pursues those goals in the only way she can, self-education. As she says, quote, it's bad enough when a country gets colonized, but when the people do as well, that's the end, really. That's the end. So we see that Nyasha is always reaching, always trying to be better, to think deeper, to understand more. She's an inherently hopeful and ambitious person, and her light helps other people. Yet, her ambition ends up causing a lot of conflict later in her life. Part 2. The use of Nyasha's eating disorder to display the effects of colonization. Now, at this juncture, it's important to discuss Nyasha's eating disorder. It starts early in the story, so surreptitiously that it's hard to really recognize until it's too late, for both her family and the audience. The first real mentions of it we get are that Nyasha has no problem going to bed hungry, that she rarely eats all that much at meals, and she also comments on Tambu's body as well as her own. While this should have been startling, with everything else going on in the story and Nyasha not exactly being the star of the show, it was a little difficult to notice, even for me, someone who's struggled with an eating disorder in the past. The key here, though, is that not only does her family and the audience not notice what she's doing to herself, but neither does Nyasha. It's stated later in the story that she doesn't know why she does it. So then the book touches on a really important and insidious aspect of eating disorders, which is that you don't even really realize they're occurring until it's too late. This message is so important for more people to hear, and it's applicable to a lot of other mental health issues as well, so it acts as a nice reminder. What I would love to discuss as well are the events and conflicts that lead up to the full and deadly development of the eating disorder at its peak. I mean, the eating disorder nearly kills Nyasha, so it's certainly important to discuss. It helps us to understand her character as well as other characters and the setting Dangarembga creates in her novel. First, we can certainly see that it stems from underlying issues. Quote, when I did mention her overworking to her, Nyasha confessed that she was nervous, as if there's everything to learn and I'll never know it all. So I have to keep reading and memorizing all the time to make sure I get it all in. She gave me one of her looks. I know it's not so desperate, but I keep thinking it is. I can't help it. If I stop for a minute, I get so worried. This shows us that Nyasha's mind works in circles, in loops, which is a very common theme for people with anxiety. And along with her anxiety, we see that her father, quote, was very impressed by his daughter's industry. So not only does she struggle with mental illness, but that disordered thinking is encouraged by her parents, the most influential people in her life at this point, and it's seen by the cultures that she is a part of as industrious. Along these same lines, there's a scene in another chapter where, after her father critiques her at the dinner table, she stops talking, stops eating, and retreats to her bedroom. In other words, she goes inside herself and shuts off. So then her parents are a direct cause of her suffering. This is really highlighted when on page 131 it says that Baba Mukuru, quote, was a rigid, imposing perfectionist, steely enough in character to function in the puritanical way that he expected, or rather insisted, that the erst of the world should function. Luckily, or maybe unluckily for him, throughout his life, Baba Mukuru had found himself in positions that enabled him to organize his immediate world and its contents as he wished. Even when this was not the case, as when he went to the mission as a young boy, the end result of such periods of submission was a greater power than before. Thus, he had been insulated from the necessity of considering alternatives unless they were his own. So we see that Nyasha's father, again, a huge role model in her life, is somebody that struggles with perfectionism, black and white thinking, workaholism, and who has control issues. These are all qualities that he gained at the hands of British colonization, and that either as biological traits or learned behaviors, eating disorders feast on. These ideas that the eating disorder is both biological and learned go along with our current psychiatric understanding of eating disorders as a whole, and they lend a lot of credibility to the story while also delving into how harmful the effects of colonization are on its victims. Part 3. Nyasha's lack of community. Next, I'd like to dig a little deeper and talk again about Nyasha's propensity to hope and to dream, as they display important details about the nature of self-harm, and eating disorders are self-harm. These two quotes are really important to me. So this one is from Nyasha on page 174, quote, "You've got to have some conviction, and I'm convinced I don't want to be anyone's underdog. It's not right for anyone to be that. But once you get used to it, well, it just seems natural and you just carry on. And that's the end of you. You're trapped. They control everything you do." So then Nyasha is an idealist. And that isn't meant to make her sound naive. She has seen how the world works and she doesn't like it. And so she constantly fights for it to be different, even just internally, by keeping that hope alive within herself. This next passage is on page 173. Quote, "I thought there was time to see what would happen, to decide what needed to be done. I thought I was wise to be preserving my energy, unlike my cousin, who was burning herself out. I put it to her, couldn't she wait to make the points she thought needed to be made? But she thought that if she waited, she'd forget what those points were." So this quote is from Tambu, and it feels so poignant to me. Nyasha can't help that she dreams of things getting better, and she knows that if she lets go of those dreams now, she will forever lose a part of herself. This goes along with the idea that those ideals are constantly being crushed and mocked by the people in her life and the colonized society she lives in, for while Nyasha encourages other people like Tambu to see new directions for their lives, she herself is constantly told by not only her father, but the society she lives in to go in one direction, a direction she doesn't even want to go in. In this way, she's giving so much and not receiving anything, probably making her feel useless and out of place, making her feel that her hopes and dreams are pointless, which certainly contributes to her propensity to self-harm. In this way, the depth of ignorance and intolerance from others is what directly causes her to hurt herself. For example, on page 277 in chapter 9, we see that at some point her eating disorder can be boiled down to pure rage. The scene I'm speaking of is the point where Baba Mukuru says that he and Nyasha's mother are killing themselves to feed and house her, and that she's being ungrateful by not eating. She's then forced to finish her dinner and throws it up afterward. This makes it very clear to me that her eating disorder is about a frustrated and constantly suppressed rebellion against her father, as well as the painful, soul-crushing patriarchy surrounding her. She seems to be saying, if I can't have freedom, if I can't live my life the way I want to live it, I'd rather hurt myself. I'd rather die. And maybe to some this seems dramatic, but as somebody who did the same thing for a long time, I can tell you just how real and widespread Nyasha's experiences are. She's trapped in a life she does not want, a life that is so stifled because of her culture's cruel and inhumane behavior to any kind of divergence from tradition. People that don't fit in, like strong, independent women like her and free thinkers, are often pushed to the side. and there's no real place for them to belong. They aren't safe. Seems familiar when you think about American culture at this point in time, doesn't it? That seems to be why, when my guru leaves her husband and daughter to stay with her brother for a few days, Nyasha doesn't seem all that bothered. In fact, she seems kind of uplifted. She did not think her mother had deserted her. Sorry, quote, she did not think her mother had deserted her. She thought there was a difference between people deserting their daughters and people saving themselves. My guru was doing the latter and would be available to her daughter when she needed it. So the thing here is that her mother is being selfish, but that's not portrayed as a bad thing. It seems to show Nyasha that she too can choose to look out for herself instead of staying trapped where she is just to make other people feel good. All Nyasha can see is how miserable her life is, and this, her mother leaving, helps her see that it doesn't have to be that way. The fact that what she wants to do so badly can be done gives her a sense of hope. Humans are social creatures, and I'm sure this idea of gaining confidence from a trusted and confident role model hits close to home for many of us. Thus, the power of community truly does have the power to heal and unite broken people. On page 293, we see that the reason Nyasha's condition got so bad in the first place was because, quote, it was truly alarming, but nobody commented, nobody acted. So then, if somebody had stepped in to teach Nyasha the skills she needed to not destroy herself and her body, everybody could have avoided that whole mess. The reason she fell into such a state was because of the selfishness of her family, and the fact that they weren't taught any skills either. The colonization they face affects them all, deprives them all, as Nyasha says in chapter 10, of each other. Quote, they've trapped us, but I won't be trapped. I'm not a good girl. I won't be trapped. Then, as suddenly as it came, the rage passed. I don't hate you, Daddy, she said softly. They want me to, but I won't. She lay down on her bed. I'm very tired, she said in a voice that was recognizably hers. But I can't sleep. Mummy, will you hold me? She curled up in my guru's lap, looking no more than 5 years old. Look what they've done to us, she said softly. I'm not one of them, but I'm not one of you. And this idea that she doesn't truly belong anywhere is certainly true for her father and mother and Tambu. They're all caught in this precarious balance of cultural traditions that threatens to tip at any moment. Saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, even just thinking the wrong thing could lead to treacherous waters for anyone, as Nyasha is led into treacherous waters when, earlier in the book, her father nearly beats her to death. My next point rests in this quote from Nyasha, found in chapter 10, which describes the rage she expressed in the previous quote. Quote, there's a whole lot more, she said. I've tried to keep it in, but it's powerful. It ought to be. There's nearly a century of it, she added, with a shadow of her wry grin. But I'm afraid, she told me apologetically, it upsets people. So I need to go somewhere where it's safe, you know what I mean? Somewhere where people won't mind. The most unfortunate thing about this book is that Nyasha's right, and yet this place where people wouldn't mind her expressing her feelings doesn't exist in the climate she's living in. Nor does it really exist today, one could argue. And yet, it is the lack of a safe space that keeps Nyasha stuck. As such, the book is sort of a call to action in and of itself. We all need to listen to one another and be kind and gentle when listening to other people's experiences. That brings me to my final point, which is that Nyasha doesn't seem to actually want to die. She just wants things to be different. This is a really important distinction to make, I think, because when Nyasha is finally sent to a doctor for her eating disorder on page 295, and they simply tell her that she's African, so she can't be suffering all that much and she's just making a scene, she begs her father to see an African psychiatrist. So we see that she doesn't actually want to be suffering. She wants help. She just doesn't know how to get it because of the behaviors modeled to her by her parents. She has no skills with which she can help herself or tolerate her distress, but she wants to find them But the only way to find them is through them being modeled to her again, which is why we must all take into account Nyasha's advice in chapter 8. Quote, "You grow," said Nyasha, as though she had heard what I was thinking. "You grow and you compensate. You have to. There's no other way. We're all trying to do it, all of us, but it's difficult when everything's laid out for you. It's difficult when everything's taken care of, even the way you think." As is my mantra in so many of my projects, the world is not black and white. And if there's anything good or magical or worthy or hopeful to be found in this world, it must be found in the attempt of understanding others. Rigidity will get you nowhere, whereas empathy and compassion are the only tools we really have to forge a brighter, happier future. So we must all get to work and forge our own paths, with the help of others, of course. So this third part then concludes my essay/podcast about Nyasha from Tsitsi Dangarembga's novel Nervous Conditions. But stick around if you'd like to hear me read off one more little longer quote that I just really, really love from this book and that I really related to as an artist and as a young AFAB person in a world and a culture that doesn't really accept a whole lot of diversity or independent thought. Thank you for listening. This quote is from chapter 9, and it comes from Nyasha, pages 277 to 278. "You know, Tambu," she began again painfully. "I guess he's right. Right to dislike me. It's not his fault, it's me, but I can't help it. Really, I can't. He makes me so angry. I can't just shut up when he puts on his God act. I'm just not made that way. Why not? Why can't I just take it like everybody else does? I ought to take it, but really I can't." There was nothing I could say that was true that would have helped, so I said nothing, but sat down beside her and put my arm round her. "It was better," she went on, "when you were here, because we could laugh about it, so it looked silly and funny and we could carry on that way, but now that you're going, there won't be anyone to laugh with. It won't be funny anymore. We'll all take these things much too seriously, but they are silly, really they are. Imagine all that fuss over a plateful of food. But it's more than that, really, more than just food. That's how it comes out, but really, it's all the things about boys and men and being decent and indecent and good and bad." He goes on with the accusations and the threats, and I'm just not coping very well. Sometimes I look at things from his point of view, you know what I mean? Traditions and expectations and authority, that sort of thing, and I can see what he means, and I try to be considerate and patient and obedient, really I do. But then I start thinking that he ought to look at things from my point of view and be considerate and patient with me. So I start fighting back and off we go again. "I suppose it's all right, really," she said, attempting to smile. "I'll just have to try harder to be better, that's all. I'm sorry I was nasty to you when you came into the classroom. It's just that, well, as I said, I'll miss you." Thank you for listening.